She collapsed, right there on the floor of her tiny Atlanta apartment. Her body went limp, her shirt stained, sweat pouring down her face. Two babies, just 2 years old, sat frozen beside her. One pressed tiny hands against her chest, crying, "Mommy, wake up!" The other grabbed a phone almost too heavy to hold. Buttons pressed, a number dialed, the line clicked, a voice answered. "Hello?" But all the operator heard were screams, high-pitched sobs, a toddler shouting, "Mommy, Mommy," over and over again, and then the words no parent should ever hear in their last moments of hope. "This has to be a prank." The operator almost hung up. This isn't just drama, this is America, where too many mothers collapse under the weight of bills, exhaustion, and a system that looks the other way. If you've ever been in a moment where nobody listened when it mattered most, hit that subscribe button right now. Don't risk ignoring stories like this. Someone's life might depend on it. Be honest. If you were the operator, would you believe the crying of two babies? Or would you think it was a prank? Drop your answer in the comments. I'm reading every single one. But here's the twist. That desperate call didn't end where anyone expected. It connected to someone no one could have imagined. A man sitting in a Manhattan skyscraper. A billionaire who had never once picked up a random call in his life. And what he did next was impossible. The operator leaned back in her chair, shaking her head. "This line is for emergencies only," she muttered. But the crying didn't stop. "Mommy, Mommy." And while those two voices carried across the wires in Atlanta, a very different sound filled the air hundreds of miles north. Manhattan, 45th floor, glass walls, polished leather chairs, a skyline that screamed money. Richard Hale sat in a custom Italian suit, Bloomberg terminals flashing numbers behind him. An assistant poured sparkling water into a crystal glass. A trader's voice came through the speakerphone. "Sir, we're up 3% on the Dow. Do you want me to move?" Richard didn't even answer. He tapped his pen on the desk, cold eyes fixed on the numbers. His world ran on profit. Time was money. Every second had a price tag. Now cut back. Atlanta. Danielle's fridge door hanging loose. Inside barely a half-gallon of milk and some bread. Bills stacked on the counter, red letters, past due. Upstairs, a neighbor turned the volume up on the TV. "You hear that crying again?" his wife asked. He shrugged. "Probably another drunk fight. Not my business." Two worlds, one struggling just to keep the lights on, the other sipping luxury like water. And yet, at this exact moment, they were connected by a single phone line. A random number. A call no one planned. This isn't a fairy tale. This is America, where in one zip code a child cries for her mother, and in another, men bet millions on stocks before lunch. So let me ask you, which world do you feel closer to? Comment Atlanta if you know the struggle, or comment Manhattan if you've seen the wealth. I want to see this divide in the comments right now, because in just seconds that divide is about to collapse. The operator pressed the receiver harder to her ear. "Is anyone there? Can you put an adult on the line?" The baby only cried louder. And at that same second, Richard's private line buzzed on his desk, unknown caller ID. He stared at it. His assistant whispered, "Ignore it, sir. Probably spam." But something made him reach. He picked it up. And with that one choice, the glass towers of Manhattan were about to crash into the cracked floors of Atlanta. Danielle dreamed of white coats, of stethoscopes, of helping people. She wanted to be a nurse. Back in high school, she told her guidance counselor, "I want to study medicine." The counselor smiled, but not with hope, with pity. "Community college is a good start," she said. Danielle nodded. She knew what that meant. Money, loans, debt. A mountain she couldn't climb. Her mother worked 2 jobs. Her father, gone before she could drive. No one was paying tuition, not in that house, not in that zip code. So the dream faded. Not overnight. It broke piece by piece. First, the textbooks she couldn't afford. Then the applications she never sent. Finally, the acceptance letters that never came. Instead of scrubs, she put on an apron. Instead of hospital halls, she walked a diner floor. Every morning at 6 a.m. sharp, the cook yelled, "Order up." She carried waffles, bacon, hot coffee that burned her wrists. "More syrup, sweetheart," a trucker would say. "Yes, ma'am," Danielle answered. She smiled, always smiled. Because tips meant rent, tips meant diapers, tips meant survival. One old man at the counter told her once, "You don't belong here. You got a nurse's heart." Danielle smiled again, but inside, she knew. Dreams don't pay bills, shifts do. Rent in Atlanta kept rising, over $1,400 a month for a two-bedroom, and she made barely above minimum wage, $2.13 an hour plus tips. That's the reality for servers in Georgia. That's what she lived on. Double shifts, 16 hours on her feet swollen, back aching, eyes heavy. Still, she tucked in her twins every night, kissed their foreheads, promised them tomorrow would be better. Her babies didn't know the struggle. They just knew mommy loved them, and she did, with everything she had. Now look north, New York City, Manhattan. Richard Hale, his name ran across Wall Street like fire. A billionaire investor, sharp, cold, relentless. The Financial Times called him the cold shark. CNBC called him untouchable. His rivals called him worse. He bought companies. He broke companies. He laid off thousands, and still smiled into cameras saying, "Business isn't about feelings, it's about numbers." At 52, Richard had never lost a deal, not one. He crushed competitors, he rewrote contracts, he walked through boardrooms like he owned the air. That morning his directors asked, "What's the next move, sir?" Richard didn't hesitate. "We don't move for people," he said. "People move for us." The room laughed. He didn't. He meant every word. This was the man the world saw. Tailored suits, private jets, a penthouse overlooking Central Park. Money stacked higher than some nation's GDP. And while Danielle was scraping tips to buy formula, Richard was sipping champagne on a jet. While Danielle begged hospitals for mercy, Richard was negotiating mergers worth billions. Two worlds, same country, different planets. And now the question, how often do men like Richard even notice women like Danielle? How often do men in glass towers ever see the women carrying coffee in diners? Be real. If you've ever felt invisible to people with power, drop scene in the comments. Because too many of us have lived that silence. Danielle? Invisible. Richard? Untouchable. But here's what no one knew. In less than 5 minutes, their worlds would collide, and nothing would ever be the same again. The line was still open, two toddlers screaming into a phone, their voices high, desperate, terrified. The operator pressed the headset closer, static, crying. She frowned. "Hello, this is 911. Put your mother on the line." No response, just that tiny voice. "Mommy, mommy." The operator shook her head. "Kids again." She muted the line, whispered across the desk, "Another prank, probably dialed by accident." Her coworker laughed. "Happens all the time. I once had a kid order pizza on 911. They both chuckled. But in that apartment in Atlanta, nothing was funny. One twin tugged at their mother's arm. Her hand slipped, lifeless. The other twin pressed the phone tighter to their ear. "Mommy, mommy." The operator unmuted. "Little one, you can't play on the phone. This is serious." Silence. Just sobs. She rolled her eyes. "I'm disconnecting now." And just like that, a mother's last lifeline almost snapped. Now picture the apartment itself. One bedroom. Cracked tiles, bills stacked on the kitchen counter stamped red, final notice. The fridge? Almost empty. Half a gallon of milk. 2 eggs. That's what her kids would eat tomorrow. And outside, the neighbors heard everything. The thuds, the crying, the desperation bleeding through paper-thin walls. "Babe, you hear that?" one man asked. His wife barely looked up from the couch. "Yeah, probably another fight." He shrugged. "She drinks, I've seen it. Not our problem." She turned the TV louder. "Noisy kids. Always crying anyway." That's what poverty sounds like to some people. Noise, inconvenience, something to turn away from. Nobody knocked, nobody asked, nobody helped. And this wasn't the first time Danielle had been dismissed. Flashback, 2 years earlier, a hospital billing office in Atlanta. Danielle stood in line, her baby burning up with fever in her arms. When it was her turn, she leaned forward. "Please, she has an infection. She needs antibiotics. I'll pay something. Just not all today." The clerk didn't even raise her head. "If you don't have insurance, we can't fill that prescription." Danielle tightened her hold on the baby. "She's in pain. She's crying every night. Please." The woman sighed. "Our policy is payment up front, no exceptions." Danielle's voice cracked. "I work. I'm not asking for charity. I'm asking for time." But the clerk's eyes never softened. Next in line. She walked out carrying her baby and her shame. No meds, no help, just tears. This isn't fiction. This is America. Hospitals really do turn people away over money. That's not a plot line. That's the system. And now, lying on that floor, her body failing, it was happening again. Her kids screaming for help and the person on the other end dismissing them. The operator tapped her screen. This has to be a prank. Her coworker chuckled. People will call for anything. Last week someone dialed because McDonald's got their order wrong. She smirked. Kids these days, always crying wolf. But these cries were real. Every second mattered. Imagine needing help, and nobody shows up. Don't let that silence continue. Subscribe right now, don't ignore these voices, and let me ask you, have you ever been judged unfairly when you were at your lowest? Type yes in the comments. Let's see how many of us carry the same wound. Because Danielle carried it. Every day, at the diner, customers looked at her uniform and assumed she wasn't smart enough for more. At the bank, tellers looked at her account and assumed she wasn't working hard enough. At the hospital, clerks looked at her bills and assumed she didn't deserve mercy. Assumptions, judgments, microaggressions, small cuts that bleed into scars. And now, her children felt that same sting. Dismissed, not believed, written off as noise. The operator hovered over the red button, ready to disconnect, but something happened. A signal rerouted. The line, bouncing across networks, shifted. The cry of a baby, desperate, piercing, unforgettable, landed somewhere else. Not in another 911 center. Not with another bored operator, but in Manhattan, on the private line of a man sitting in a glass tower, a billionaire who never answered random calls. Not once in his life, until today. Manhattan. Boardroom, floor-to-ceiling glass, a view of Central Park, a table worth more than some homes in Atlanta. Richard Hale sat at the head, directors on both sides. Laptops open, charts glowing, millions on the line. Gentlemen, one said, if we close the deal today, profits triple by next quarter. Another added, sir, the pension funds are watching, we can't stall. Richard didn't answer, because his private phone buzzed. Unknown caller. He frowned, his assistant leaned down. Spam call, ignore it. But Richard lifted it anyway. Hello? At first, nothing but static. Then, Mommy, Mommy, the sound of a child's scream. His face hardened. What the hell is this? The boardroom went quiet. He raised the phone. Who is this? Speak up. Only crying, screams, a toddler's broken words. His CFO whispered, Sir, put it down. Some kid got hold of a phone, happens all the time. But Richard didn't put it down, because the cry was raw, real. It hit something he hadn't felt in years. Mommy, Mommy, wake up. The voice cut through the static. The entire boardroom stared. Is this a joke? Richard snapped. The crying didn't stop. A director leaned back, laughing. You're interrupting a 9-figure deal for this? Another smirked. Sir, you've got to be kidding me. This is ridiculous. Richard slammed his pen on the table. Trace this call. Now. His assistant blinked, stunned. Sir, you're not serious. I said trace it. Richard barked. The room froze. Sir, one executive whispered, this is Wall Street. We don't chase children's pranks. Let the police deal with it. Richard shot back. Then you call them. Silence. Mommy, please. The child's voice cracked through the line again. Richard's jaw tightened. His hands shook, not with fear but fury. One director muttered under his breath. Wasting time. He's gone soft. Another snorted. Billions on the table and he's playing babysitter. Richard turned his chair slowly, eyes cold. If any of you open your mouth again, he said, you're out. The room went dead. Imagine it, a Manhattan boardroom worth millions, and Richard Hale, the cold shark of Wall Street, silencing his empire over the sound of 2 crying babies. So let me ask you, what would you do if you heard a child screaming for help on the phone? Be real. Comment below. The assistant whispered again. Sir, do you want me to disconnect? Richard stared at the phone. Every instinct told him to hang up, to get back to the billions, to protect the deal. But that cry, that desperate cry, it drilled into him. It wouldn't let go. He pushed back his chair. The leather groaned. The board watched in shock. Where are you going, sir? One asked. Richard didn't answer. He grabbed his coat, he grabbed the phone, and he stormed out. That cry, Richard didn't stop moving. His assistant chased him down the hall. "Sir, the market." Richard cut her off. "Cancel it. Get the jet ready." Within an hour, he was on a Gulfstream, leather seats, champagne on ice, a flight crew trained to serve billionaires. But Richard wasn't drinking. He was pacing. The phone still in his hand, the cries still ringing in his ears. "Mommy, wake up!" That sound, it crawled under his skin. "Sir, we'll touch down in Atlanta in 90 minutes, the pilot called. Richard didn't answer. He just stared out at the clouds, and for once the sky felt heavier than numbers. Atlanta. Night settling over cracked streets and tired apartments. Not far from downtown, sirens echoed. The kind Danielle had heard before, but never for her. Richard's black SUV pulled up fast. Security in dark coats rushed ahead. They kicked open the apartment door, and there it was. The scene that froze him. A one-bedroom, dim, hot. Bills scattered across the table, 2 toddlers screaming, and their mother, collapsed on the rug, eyes closed, chest barely rising. Richard stepped inside, his shoes polished Italian leather, a suit worth $5,000, and yet he looked like a man stripped of everything. He knelt down. "Ma'am, can you hear me?" Nothing. One twin pulled at his jacket. "Help her," the child cried. The other still clutched the phone, face wet with tears. Richard froze. The man who moved markets with a word, now powerless before a black mother on a carpet. Think about that. A man who controlled billions, now begging one woman to breathe. His security said, "Sir, let the medics handle it." Richard shook his head. "No, she's not waiting." He pulled off his jacket, laid it under her head. His voice cracked. "Hold on, just hold on. If you think only money saves lives, think again. Subscribe right now, because stories like this prove humanity matters. And let me ask you, do you believe people really change in moments like this? Or do they always go back to who they were? Drop your take in the comments. The toddlers screamed again. "Mommy, please." Richard Hale, billionaire shark, swallowed hard. For the first time, no deal, no contract, no empire could protect him. He was staring at something bigger than money, something he couldn't buy. And the impossible thing he did next wasn't about wealth. It was about something he thought he lost years ago. Richard didn't wait. He bent down, lifted Danielle in his arms, her body limp, her twins trailing at his legs, crying, "Don't leave Mommy." His security shouted, "Sir, let us carry her." Richard barked back, "No, I've got her." He walked down the stairwell, step by step, a billionaire in a $1,000 tie, carrying a waitress who could barely pay rent. And that's when the cameras clicked. Neighbors leaned out of doors, phones out. "Is that Richard Hale?" someone whispered. Another gasped, "What's he doing in this building?" Flash, flash, flash. Headlines were being written in real time. A man known for closing factories, now carrying a single black mom through a rundown apartment complex in Atlanta. By the time he reached the SUV, the crowd had gathered. Kids on bikes, moms with strollers, everyone whispering, everyone filming. "Sir, the hospital's ready," his driver said. "Move," Richard roared. They tore through the streets, sirens clearing a path. When they pulled up, nurses stood waiting. Not the usual shuffle. Not the usual size. "Quick, get her inside," one yelled. "Prep a room now," another shouted. The same hospital that once turned Danielle away over money was suddenly sprinting. Not because her condition changed, but because the cameras were rolling, because a billionaire was standing there. Richard laid her on the gurney himself. "She was unconscious when I found her," he said firmly. The doctor nodded. "We'll take it from here, sir." Another whispered, "Did he just call 911 himself?" Inside the waiting area, whispers spread. "That's Richard Hale, the Wall Street guy. What's he doing here?" "They're moving fast now, huh?" Remember this. The same hospital that once denied her treatment was now moving like her life was priceless. So let me ask you, have you noticed how people treat you different once they realize you matter to someone powerful? Share your story in the comments. I want to hear them. Doctors rushed her down the hall. Richard sat in the waiting room, tie undone, hands clasped, his mind racing. One of his assistants whispered, "Sir, the media's everywhere. This is going viral." Richard didn't answer. For once, he didn't care about headlines. He only cared about the sound of 2 toddlers still crying behind him. And here's the truth. Saving her body was only half the miracle, because what came next was far greater. Hours passed, monitors beeped, IVs dripped. Danielle lay in the hospital bed, still. Her twins sat in the waiting room, eyes red, thumbs in their mouths. They clutched Richard's sleeve, refusing to let go. "Is Mommy better?" one whispered. Richard's throat tightened. "She will be," he said quietly. But the truth? He wasn't sure. Doctors moved in and out. "Vitals are stabilizing," one nurse reported. "Cardiac stress," another said. Words heavy with years of exhaustion. Richard sat there, watching every move. No phone calls, no stock updates, no assistants barking orders, just silence. And a billionaire staring at a mother who had nothing but 2 babies. And the will to survive. Morning came. The news had already exploded. Wall Street titan saves Atlanta mother. Richard Hale abandons boardroom, carries single mom to hospital. CNN, Fox, local Atlanta stations. Every outlet wanted the story. Outside the hospital, cameras swarmed. Inside, whispers spread. "That's him, the billionaire. Never thought I'd see him here." And then, Danielle stirred. Her eyes opened slowly, confused, weak. Where are my babies?" she whispered. Richard leaned forward. "They're safe, right outside. They never left you." Tears welled in her eyes. She turned her head, saw the machines, the wires, and then him, the billionaire. Who are you?" she asked faintly. Richard hesitated. For once his name felt small. "Someone who heard your children," he said simply. The twins rushed in, guided by a nurse. "Mommy!" they cried. Danielle's arms shook as she reached for them. She kissed their heads, sobbing. "You saved me," she whispered. Richard stepped back. He felt it. Power meant nothing here. Titles meant nothing. Money meant nothing. This was humanity. Days later, Danielle was discharged. But her story didn't end at the hospital doors, because Richard wasn't done. At a press conference, microphones crowded him. "Mr. Hale, why did you leave your board meeting? Was this a publicity stunt?" Richard raised a hand. "Publicity?" he repeated. "No. Humanity." The crowd went silent. Reporters fired again. "What happens next?" Richard cleared his throat. "She doesn't need charity. She needs justice. Mothers like her need a system that doesn't abandon them. So I'm creating a foundation, starting here in Atlanta, to cover medical bills, to support single mothers, to make sure stories like this don't end in silence." The room erupted. Cameras flashed. Headlines wrote themselves. Danielle watched from the side, clutching her twins, tears streaming down her face. And later that night, Richard admitted in a quieter interview, it wasn't money that saved her. It was the sound of a child's cry. That sound broke me. It reminded me of my own humanity, something I forgot chasing numbers. America heard those words. They went viral, shared on Facebook, retweeted on Twitter, clipped on TikTok. Mothers commented, "That could have been me." Fathers wrote, "I've seen neighbors collapse and no one checked." Young people said, "Finally, someone with power did something right." And here's the truth. Danielle's recovery wasn't just physical. It was symbolic. A reminder of the divide. A reminder of the silence. A reminder that dignity isn't a privilege. It's a right. And for Richard, the shark of Wall Street, for the first time, he saw himself not in the mirror of money, but in the eyes of 2 crying children who called for help. At that moment, wealth bowed to humanity. But let me ask you this. If that call had gone to your phone, what would you have done? Because this story isn't about billions. It's about a choice. 2 babies, 1 phone, a cry that almost got ignored, and a billionaire who did the impossible. Not because he had wealth, not because he had power, but because, for once, he listened. And that's the lesson. How many cries go unheard every single day in this country? How many mothers collapse and no one answers? How many children beg and the world scrolls past? Be honest with yourself. If you were the operator, would you have listened? If that call came to your phone, would you have stayed on the line? Or would you have hung up? If you scroll away without subscribing, what does that say about you? Would you be the one who ignores the cry? Would you be the one who turns up the TV, says, "Not my problem," and moves on? Don't be that person. Don't be another silent neighbor. Don't be another system that turns people away. Subscribe right now. Not for me, not for numbers, but because tomorrow, it could be your cry for help. Comment your city below. I want to see where people still care when a child screams for their mother. This story isn't just Danielle's, it's ours, it's yours. So subscribe, share this, and remember, never ignore the cry.